Dr. Hyppa-Martin's passion is working to improve communication and social inclusion for individuals with severe disabilities. She has earned her doctoral degree from the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis, where she studied augmentative and alternative communication interventions for individuals with neurodevelopmental disabilities. She directs the Augmenting Language Lab at the University of Minnesota, Duluth, and the work she and her graduate students have accomplished has been featured in numerous national and international presentations and publications. Please help me welcome Dr. Hyppa-Martin.
Thank you, Adara. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I am so excited to be here today. I was so happy when Deborah reached out many months ago and said, you know, we're doing this conference. Any chance you'd be willing to come and give a talk about communication supports for individuals who have Mowat-Wilson syndrome? And of course, my first question was, what is Mowat-Wilson syndrome, right? So the first thing I did was Google, what is Mowat-Wilson syndrome? And I have learned so much since then, and I'm so grateful for that. And I'm so happy to be here meeting all of you and talking about how we can support communication for individuals, children, adults alike, who are diagnosed with Mowat-Wilson syndrome or MWS. So even though I hadn't heard of MWS before, as Adara mentioned, I did the Neurodevelopmental Disabilities Doctoral Fellowship, and we spent a whole year talking about different types of genetic conditions and neurodevelopmental disabilities and how they affect children's abilities to communicate and how we can best support them using a really interdisciplinary model. So it's part of my profession that this happens, and it's going to continue happening. I remember, I think it was in 2010, the first time I learned about Angelman syndrome, which is really much more well-known than Mowat-Wilson syndrome is, but back then there was hardly anything about Angelman syndrome too, and we make progress, and that's what's going to be happening with MWS as well. We see the timeline in the hallway, and that's exciting to see. All right, so supporting communication for individuals with Mowat-Wilson syndrome. We'll talk about some strategies and common questions. I've been doing this work with one of my wonderful graduate students at the university. Her name is Qwynn Tyman, so I just want to acknowledge her contributions to this talk today. Part of our code of ethics as speech-language pathologists is we always disclose our relationships before we do events like this. So financial disclosures, many thanks to the MWS Foundation for supporting me and being able to attend this conference with registration and lodging and an honorarium. And again, so happy to be here. And my non-financial disclosures are, I go out and give talks and do workshops like this as just a part of professional service that I do to the community. And I actively engage in research designed to hopefully improve social engagement for individuals with severe communication disabilities. We actually have a survey study going on right now where we're doing a survey study to write an article that will more clearly detail some of the characteristics, communication strengths and needs among individuals with Mowat-Wilson syndrome. I understand that the link's been posted to the Facebook group, and so feel free to check that out if you're interested in participating in that. And then this is just a disclaimer. Of course, it's fun to talk, scenarios and talk about specific children and so on, but nobody can treat or diagnose or assess or make recommendations without actually seeing a child. So even though we talk about scenarios, of course, just know I don't have all of the answers, and nor do we, we haven't seen your children. I'm happy to discuss it. I know everybody is, but we just need to remember that it's a great idea for your child to see a speech-language pathologist with expertise in this area. Adara mentioned my augmenting communication for all, my augmenting language lab up at UMD. After crossing paths with the Mowat-Wilson Syndrome Foundation, a lot of my graduate students have taken a lot of interest in this condition. And it's a line of research that we really want to work on advancing at the lab. So this is just kind of the first step, and hopefully I can continue to learn more about Mowat-Wilson syndrome and how we can best support children and adults who have MWS in their communication development. And this is important for the SLPs as well, and the special educators and educators, OTs, PTs, because they're all in that same position where when they hear for the first time, oh, I'm getting this new client who's going to come in and they have Mowat-Wilson syndrome. What's that? Let me Google it. Nothing on Google. Let me go to the scientific databases. I searched 6 of them, Qwynn and I did, using a combination of like 17 different search terms and found nothing that directly addressed how do you provide best communication intervention for this population. We found many articles that were about general developmental trends, and they might have like a half a paragraph about communication characteristics, but even those varied quite a bit. Some would say, these individuals with MWS have really strong receptive communication and some speech, but limited speech. And another article might say no speech at all, and the majority of individuals with this condition have difficulty acquiring speech. And, so it's kind of a mixed bag. So one of my hopes is that as we learn more and more about MWS and we advance the intervention science, that we also, like on my end in the research area, do a better job in supporting the interventionists and therapists who have the honor of serving your children and your loved ones, and so they're feeling better prepared because there's a stronger scientific basis there. Okay, so we're here to talk about common questions and needs related to supporting communication. So there's kind of 5 areas that we're gonna get through. First, we'll talk about communication. That's always our goal. Second, we'll say, what is AAC? Third, we'll talk about AAC and Mowat-Wilson syndrome. Then we'll talk a little bit about teaching communication using AAC, and then just where do we go from here? What can we do next? It tends to get a little conversational, which I love. I'm totally open to Q&A, but that means sometimes we don't get through everything. So I'll just tell you right now that if you jot down my email address, that's right there, jhm@d.umn.edu, or just take a picture of it. Please drop me an email, and I would be happy to send you a bonus track. I'd be happy to send you a bonus track, sounds like my mic's back on, of resources and things we talked about and helpful strategies. I'd be happy to do that for you. Okay. So let's talk about communication. Defining communication. I teach the Introduction to Human Communication Disorders class at my university, which is all undergrads, freshmen, sophomores, most of them are not even majoring in anything to do with human communication or speech pathology, because it's a lib ed course. And so when I first say let's define communication, there's sometimes a little bit of a groan, but after we talk it through, everybody realizes that we tend to use terms like communication, language, and speech really interchangeably, but they're actually very different concepts. And when we're talking AAC and supporting our learners who have complex communication needs, it is really important to understand the differences between those terms. So communication, a definition is that it's an exchange of ideas or information between a sender and a receiver. So I know it shows these folks sitting, but you could sit, stand, walk, lie down, be swimming, whatever, but it has to be this exchange of information going back and forth between the sender and the receiver. That's communication. And if somebody is trying to tell you something and you're not getting it, you're not receiving it, that's a communication breakdown, right? And have you ever had an instance where maybe your child is trying to communicate something to you and you can't understand them and they're getting more and more frustrated? And then things sometimes can go off the rails. Communication breakdown. So that's why our number one goal is we want communication, right? We know that the more communication breakdowns that happen, the greater the chance of challenging behaviors, reduced social interaction, learning goes down, emotional challenges arise, etc. So communication is always our goal here. So now that we know that communication is that exchange of information and ideas between a sender and a receiver, the next step is that we have to have language in order to have communication. But language is just this set of socially shared codes, and they're pretty arbitrary. So language is this set of codes that we all kind of agree upon their meaning or can understand their meaning. For example, if I take the 3 speech sounds k, a, and t, and I put them together to say cat, Now, the meaning that you have in your mind is probably that furry, four-legged domesticated animal that purrs, right? A cat. But whoever said that that meaning has to be represented by those three sounds, k, at, cat, right? It's arbitrary. Some of these symbols can be really difficult to figure out because they're totally arbitrary. But we have to agree on those symbols because that's our language. So our language is this collection of symbols. And I have to be able to produce those symbols and you have to be able to understand them for us to get this communication, and vice versa. So we have this whole collection of these symbols. Some are arbitrary, some make more sense. And the symbols, though, come in three different, I say flavors, but three different categories: graphic, gestural, and vocal. So cat, when I say cat, and I speak that language symbol, what mode am I using? Vocal mode, which is my voice; gestural mode, my body language or body movements, facial expression; or graphic mode, where we're using some kind of a word or an image. So if I say cat, what mode is that? Vocal, exactly, right on. Okay, how could you only use vocal mode but not say cat, but give me a different vocal symbol that I will know you mean cat? Yeah, exactly, still vocal mode, still works, right? Okay, now how about graphic mode? So I can do that, right? Same thing, still talking about the furry, four-legged domesticated animal that purrs. But what if I'm pre-literate? Now what kind of graphic could maybe I produce to communicate cat to you?
Cat's face.
Yeah, like we have it whiskers, you got that right. Cat needs whiskers, like, yeah, right? Something like that, you'd get that was a cat, right? Yeah, graphic mode, cat. Okay, how about gestural mode? So only using your body. If you had to communicate the cat symbol to me using gesture mode, which means just your body, facial expression, what would you do? Good, yeah, okay. Oh, I liked that one. Show us that one again. Ooh, yeah, cat, good. Totally get it, right? So these are all symbols that I can send to you and you understand them, or you can send to me and I understand them. And so we're using graphic, gestural, and vocal symbols in our language to communicate. And we know we're exchanging ideas and information. So we have, even though we're all speaking English, this is all English, or I shouldn't say we're all speaking it because that's vocal, but these modes are all English, the symbols are all English. It's the same language, it's just that we're using the different modes of symbols: graphic, gestural, and vocal. And I like to start with that because sometimes when we talk about AAC, it seems a little intimidating to people, like, oh, that's a whole different language. It's so confusing. I don't even know where to begin. It's really not that confusing because you're all already using it anyway, because it really is just graphic, gestural, and vocal communication. So, yeah. And we use it expressively and receptively. So again, to get this exchange, whatever symbol you pick, like if you have a symbol that you're showing me but I don't understand it, then we didn't achieve communication, right? So the symbol has to be one that you can produce, whether you vocalize it, gesture it, or give it in a graphic. And it has to be one that I can comprehend. So this communication all comes down to symbols. They're super important. Okay, so in this photo, this gal in the polka dot shirt seems to be talking to this person. So what mode is she expressing herself in, graphic, gestural, or vocal? Vocal, she's talking. Looks like she might also be gesturing a little bit too, right? Yeah, vocal mode, yeah. Okay, and then this little cutie. So we see this facial expression and this body posture, and she's so cute. So is that graphic, gestural, or vocal? Gestural. And if you had to give that meaning, what is she communicating to you with that gesture? What word? Love. Anyone else got another word? Happy. Something good? Yeah. Yes, we're getting, and nobody ever told us that, like, look, when somebody comes to you and puts their hands like this and tips their head like that and smiles, then that means happy. You know, we didn't need that training. These are just symbols that we already understand and we're already using. Okay, so here, this little gal looks like she's learning how to write. So what mode is she learning? Graphic, learning graphic. It's tough to learn how to write, right? And these folks, what mode are they using to communicate? Gestural, exactly. All of these modes have advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, a big advantage of gestural communication is you don't need to be able to hear, right? Vocal, you have to be able to hear it. Your partner has to hear that symbol. So if you needed to communicate with somebody who your partner couldn't hear, then using vocal mode symbols is not going to be a good option for you because you're not going to get that exchange. In my case, I don't know sign language. I don't know signed exact English. I don't know finger spelling. So if somebody tried to send those symbols to me, I would not understand it either. You know, I wish I knew it, but I don't. So yeah, gestural communication. A drawback of gestural is you need to be able to see the person, right? At least to communicate like that. So, all right, and look at this, gestural communication. So if you're looking at that facial expression, what one word do you think comes to mind, or what is he communicating to you? Curiosity. Curiosity, yep. It also, the first time I saw this, I thought he's really contemplating something very deeply, and then I thought, or he's looking at a roller coaster. But sometimes the context, gives you more information. Nope, I didn't do it. Okay, how about these? Gestural, right? Meaning what? Yes. Okay, what kind of communication is here? Graphic, gestural, or vocal? Graphic. So she is receiving the graphic from here. So she's the receptive communicator. She's receiving the graphic message that she's reading. But then she's also writing. So that's expressive graphic communication, where she's communicating to herself, taking notes for herself, right? That's also graphic. And then how about this? Graphic, gestural, vocal. All three, probably? Probably, yep, exactly. I agree with you. So it looks like she's going to be doing some typing, which would be graphic. Got earphones on. I mean, maybe they're Skyping or Zooming or, whatever. So it could be that there's even gestural and vocal. Maybe she's listening to vocal, which really illustrates how even though we can break these three flavors of symbols down into graphic, gestural, and vocal, really, we're often using all of them in combination or different combinations and deciding which mode is best given the circumstance that we're in, right? So if you walk into a crowded nightclub and the music is jamming and you see your friend across the hall, what mode, how do you think you might get their attention? Gestural, yeah, because they probably aren't going to hear you, yeah. So we're switching between these modes all the time. And this one shows how sometimes we can't even really tell is it graphic, gestural, or vocal. It's happening maybe all at once. He could be doing FaceTime with somebody there, or maybe he's reading a text message, which would be graphic, or maybe FaceTime, which might be vocal and gestural. I mean, we're using these three modes all the time. And here, this also illustrates how we're constantly using these three modes. So this woman is expressive graphic, because she's writing something on the board. This woman is receptive graphic, because she's receiving, she's reading that written message. But this woman also kind of looks like she's about to make a vowel sound there, I think, talking. So that would be vocal expressive, so she would be receptive vocal. And then look at their gestural. I mean, her body positioning is indicating I'm interested in what you're doing, I'm looking at it, So we have these three modes and we're using them all the time. But the catch is, and the reason that people have complex communication needs is because not all of these modes work for all people, right? Not all people can write in graphic mode communication, or can maybe see sign language, or, so not all modes work for all people, and each mode has pros and cons. We were talking about some of them, in a noisy room, gestural is a pretty good way to go, but maybe gestural doesn't work for everybody depending upon your motor needs. But remember that it's all about symbols. We need to have symbols that we agree upon, that you can send and I can receive and vice versa, or we don't have communication. So if we don't have shared symbols in modes that both the sender and the receiver can understand and use, then we can't communicate. And remember, number one is that our number one goal is communication. So we have to get those symbols right. So really AAC comes down to symbols. There's a lot of fancy definitions in textbooks and research studies and online about what is AAC. This is my definition. A set of symbols customized for a specific person's communication needs, skills, settings, and partners. It's like, what are your needs? What are your skills? What are your strengths? Who do you have to communicate with? In what setting? About what topic? What skills do you have? Because we'll make the symbols fit that. And we'll find symbols that the other people will understand. The American Speech Language, I need a speech therapist now. The American Speech Language Hearing Association's definition is that AAC refers to children and adults with speech or language needs that can use other ways to communicate besides talking or writing. There are many types of AAC that they can use. So augmentative, the first A, means that we're beefing something up, we're helping it out, we're giving it some support. Alternative, the second A, means that, okay, you know what, that mode right in this circumstance isn't working, we're gonna use something completely different. So augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, just means we're gonna find ways to communicate where we can beef up or support your existing communication abilities, or if there's certain things that just aren't working for you right now, we'll give you an alternative. But it's all about the communication. Communication is always our goal. And people of all ages can use AAC. Some people use it for a short amount of time. Some people will use it for their entire lifetime. And if you use AAC, you are like 4 million other Americans who use AAC because their natural speech does not meet their daily communication needs. But honestly, since all of us are always using graphic, gestural, and vocal mode communication, and we're changing up what we have to do, given the topic and the setting, we all use AAC, don't we? We all use AAC, not just 4 million people. Okay, so we talked about the three kind of different categories of symbols, graphic, gestural, or vocal. And there's two general categories of AAC. And we don't have to get too down in the weeds here, but I just want you to be familiar with these terms if they ever come up to you. So there's aided AAC and unaided AAC. Aided AAC means any kind of augmentative or alternative system that is external to your body. So it can be these non-electronic communication boards, big boards, little boards, picture books, alphabet boards, all of this. It can be the latest eye gaze devices with the best software and voice output. Anything external to your body is aided AAC. Anything that is not, that you're doing with your body, is unaided AAC. So a more simple way of thinking of this is like, unaided AAC is really about vocal and gestural mode, and aided AAC is mainly graphic mode. But a comprehensive AAC system will give the user access to all of those modes, because we all use all of those modes, right? So when we think about aided AAC, there's so many images that come to mind, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen AAC devices hands-on in real life, and how many of you have a loved one, child or adult, who uses an AAC system to communicate? Yeah, great. And for those of you who just raised your hand, how many of you use a non-electronic AAC system that doesn't have any batteries or charging or electronic? Both. And how many of you use an electronic system, some kind of high-tech system? Mm-hmm. Good, so we have a mix here. So yeah, you can Google pictures and just see, gazillions of images of aided AAC. And there is aided AAC systems to solve any issue that you can think of. Just a quick example here is, I worked with a gentleman who, one of his favorite things to do was, I think like twice a month, a community organization had a dance hall evening in his community, and he wanted to ask people to dance. He doesn't speak. And it was too bulky to have a communication book, or it's dark in there and they can't see the symbols and whatever. So this is just a little Talk Watch, I think it was called, that we bought for like $125. 3 symbols, you push the first one and it says, would you be willing to dance with me? And, thank you very much for the dance and have a nice evening. And so, yeah. The point of sharing that is I think sometimes when we think aided AAC, we think of an iPad with an app on it or something from Talk to Me Technologies, Dynavox, Prank-U-Romic. I love all of those companies, work with them all. But for whatever solution or whatever issue you have, there are solutions in the world of AAC out there. The more aided AAC, non-electronic, obviously, lots more. So we've discussed AAC, we've defined augmentative and alternative communication. We know it uses those 3 modes, and we know it can be aided or unaided. It can be electronic or non-electronic. But I want to clarify for you what it is not. So AAC is not facilitated communication. Has anybody ever heard of FC? I see your face. I know. Me too, when I wanted to cry. Okay, what she said, yeah. Her face was like, because she saw the top 10 thing on Netflix. Was that like 2 weekends ago? Yeah, 2 weekends ago, I sat on the couch, turned on Netflix. It was like number 1 or number 2. What was the name of it? Yeah, oh, I can't remember the name. Anyhow, it was in the top 10 on Netflix, and I could tell by the icon it had something to do with communication and speech pathology, and I'm like, ooh, this sounds a great way to spend Friday afternoon. So I clicked play. It was the most horrifying documentary ever. There are so many horrible documentaries about facilitated communication. So I should stop there. Don't watch the documentary, but the reason I wanted to bring it up is sometimes it looks a lot like AAC because it involves people using communication devices that look like iPads and stuff. And since this topic made its way into pop culture again, and a lot of people now are like, ooh, did you see the FC documentary? If you say, hey, I went to this great conference in Minneapolis and learned about AAC and communication devices, or, and then your friend is like, oh, don't ever do that. Didn't you see that thing on Netflix? You can just tell them that is something totally different than what we're doing than AAC. And if you want to go into the weeds, just go to asha.org. That's for the American Speech Language Hearing Association, ASHA.org. And in the search bar, type in facilitated communication. You can read all about it. You'll know that it is a discredited technique. It is not evidence-based, and it is not anything that any speech language pathologist would ever use with anybody. Okay, enough about that. What else is AAC not? It's not about bells and whistles and high-tech fancy devices. You can communicate using AAC. You can start an AAC system with pens and paper and clipboards and stuff you get at the dollar store. It is also those high-tech devices. But AAC, it's about communication. It's not about the fancy technologies and the bells and whistles. It's about whatever we have to use to get that exchange. So never think, we're going to start it in a few years after we decide what app we're going to use. No, let's find ways to incorporate it right now. I'll share ideas as we go through this in the next 45 minutes. It's not a last resort. So AAC is not an either-or situation with speech. And I understand that concern. That's the number one myth I've encountered over my 20-ish years of working as an SLP in the area of AAC is parents and loved ones who say, you know what, I don't want to start on these picture symbols right now because I want my child to talk. And I get that because this is not how you were seeing maybe your parenting journey go. I completely understand. But this is not an either-or thing. In fact, there's research that has emerged that shows that introducing AAC interventions actually supports communication development. And there are studies, this is an older one I have cited here, but another one more recently came out of the University of Minnesota, that right down the road, that highlighted collateral speech production, which means they were working on AAC and not speech, and the child began speaking more. So it's not an either-or kind of thing. In fact, you can work on speech and AAC. That's really common to work on both of them. There's also relationships between speech, AAC, and challenging behaviors, in that if speech is really difficult for a child to acquire or they're having difficulty communicating, they are at much higher risk of engaging in challenging behaviors. And then challenging behaviors reduces social experiences and affects friendships and educational opportunities. And, it kind of can get this whole spiral going. So we really want to help that child have really positive behavior and be socially engaged and included. And AAC can help with all of these things. And if you send me an email, my email is at the beginning, jhm@d.umn.edu. I'll send you a bonus track that'll have a bunch of resources. These are just a list of a whole bunch of other things that AAC has been shown to benefit, including comprehension, self-regulation, social interaction, etc. I will also send you this whole PowerPoint if you would like that as well. Okay, so we talked about communication, because it's all about communication. That's our goal. We defined what is AAC and what it isn't. And third on that list of 5 things to do is, let's talk about AAC and Mowat-Wilson syndrome. So I already shared with you that, when Deborah called me, I was like, well, I don't know what Mowat-Wilson syndrome is. Let's learn about it. And now by digging into the research literature as much as possible, there's not a lot of consistent information about what is kind of typical for communication development, what are some characteristics and things that interventionists and SLPs really need to keep in mind. I think it was back in 2010, 2009, somewhere around there, I encountered my first client with Angelman syndrome and had a similar experience where I said, okay, I need to learn as much as I can about this so I can provide communication intervention. And right now, trying to learn how to best serve individuals with MWS kind of feels like where they were with Angelman syndrome, that many years ago. So everyone's going to keep pushing forward with MWS, and the intervention science is going to improve, and everybody's working together, and gains are being made, which is exciting to see that timeline in the hallway for sure. But at this point, it's not like you can go online and order, the textbook on the proven evidence-based approaches to best support communication development in individuals with MWS. The state of the science is just not there yet. So that's okay, because there's lots of other sources of evidence that we can go to and that all of you can go to make sure that we're providing the best evidence-based interventions that we possibly can. And what we know for sure right now is that when it comes to serving individuals who have this diagnosis, AAC is not a one-size-fits-all for sure. It needs to be customized to the individual for sure. And how many of you know the phrase, the least dangerous assumption? Have you heard that before? See a couple yeses. The idea is this. So, historically, there's been this thought process where interventionists might say, I don't think that this child is ready for AAC or for speech therapy because they don't have object permanence. They're not engaging in joint attention. They don't have this supposed list of prerequisite skills that somebody thought they needed to have before they could then be a candidate to get an AAC device or start an AAC system. That fell out of favor decades ago, and we're never going back there. We now make the least dangerous assumption, which is, if I assume that this child is not ready so I don't teach them to communicate, then I'm the problem, right? If I assume they're not ready, so let's not give that intervention, then they're not going to learn to communicate because we didn't teach them, right? So we make the least dangerous assumption and say, we're going to support this learner in learning how to communicate. The progress may be slow. We may have to revise and be very thoughtful about analyzing our data, but we're still going to provide them support. So we call this the participation model now rather than a candidacy model, and we make the least dangerous assumption. Okay, and to do that, what we need to keep in mind is that we need to carefully evaluate the skills of the learner, their needs, their communication needs, and then monitor their performance so that that can really inform our intervention. Tell you more about that, I'll show you a figure in a moment and we'll talk it through. The other thing we do, as we're working on, really customizing, because one size does not fit all, the other thing we do is we give some careful thought about what should this AAC system look like. We want it to be specific to that user. And we talked about these modes of communication, right? And we know even with modes, all modes have advantages and disadvantages, like vocal mode communication. It's super portable. Our voices are always with us. We never have to charge them, right? Most of the time they work great. Quick to produce. We can talk 150 to 250 words per minute is average human speech. I think I can do like 325 when I'm really excited about something. It's widely used. I knew I could come here today and use vocal mode, widely used. Big advantages. But there's disadvantages to vocal mode too. It's transient. So I say a phrase, you only hear it for a split second and then it's gone. And that puts a burden on your memory, right? Which is why I'm augmenting your vocal mode receptive communication with graphic mode by having this PowerPoint slide, right? But speech is transient. Motor skills. It's actually hard to produce speech. We use more of our brain to produce speech than we do to walk. Have you ever been talking along and all of a sudden a word just comes out and your tongue is just kind of stuck on it? Happens to all of us on occasion, and it just shows how complex speech is to produce motorically. Another, kind of disadvantage is I can be speaking symbols all day long, but if you can't hear them because of either your abilities or because of the noisy setting, then it doesn't work, right? So every one of these modes has their pros and cons. And so when we're thinking of an AAC system, we have to think, what mode can we put the symbols in so that the user with their skills and abilities can produce them, and so that the people that they need to have real life communication with can understand them. So we consider that. How many of you, in the last session, we had a couple questions about AAC assessments. Anybody ever gone through an AAC assessment? Yeah, so a really important part of an AAC assessment is the process called feature matching. You can even just Google that, feature matching AAC, and sometimes you'll see checklists and resources online that will say, okay, the user's name, the learner's name, and okay, describe their vision. How small of objects can they see? Describe their fine motor skills. Can they isolate a finger? What body part are they going to use to make a selection? Are they ambulatory or do they use a wheelchair? If they're ambulatory, how much weight can they carry around with them? What kind of environments do they need to communicate in? So you get the idea. Feature matching is where we identify all of the strengths and the needs of the person who's going to use AAC to communicate, and we work on matching the features of a system to meet all of those needs. So we have to think about things like portability. Is this a small ambulatory person who needs a lightweight device to carry with them that, maybe we'll put it on a strap so it's always with them? Or is this a learner who maybe uses a wheelchair and has some vision requirements, so we could mount it on the chair and, give them more real estate? So feature matching. In the feature matching process, you consider their sensory needs, the things they might want to talk about, the type of display, and so on. You can do an entire semester course on feature matching, but Google it, there's good resources online. So that is one major component of customizing an AAC system. Think of it this way. I could put in all the best work and make this beautiful graphic mode AAC system on an iPad, and then I've made non-electronic backup copies, and I put it on, I have communication symbols on the wall, and I have them in the van, and I've got the device, and it's so gorgeous, and we're ready to use it. And then it turns out it's a complete failure because all of my symbols were 1.5 by 1.5 inch, and it turns out this child at this point is only successful if the symbols are at least 2 by 2 with at least a 1/2 inch plain space between every one of them, right? It can be something like that could derail an intervention, and that's why feature matching is so important, why customizing is so important. But I don't want to scare you about feature matching and make it sound like it's impossible. It really isn't. It's just that I always want to avoid this situation where somebody says, oh, we tried AAC, it didn't work. Because no. It's not that the AAC didn't work, it's the intervention didn't work. Something wasn't right for that learner. If somebody wants to communicate about something, there's something they love in this world, you know, you can get an AAC system to work for that. So it's, in my book, it's never okay to say, oh, we tried it, it didn't work. There's a reason there, and we need to take a data-driven, low inference approach and monitor performance data to figure that out, because we're making the least dangerous assumption, and everybody needs to be able to communicate. It's a basic human right. Okay, more graphic mode. I know you're all familiar with these, so we don't have to talk about them too much. Okay, teaching communication. Number 4. Teaching communication with AAC can be a little, a little different than how those people who are typically developing learned how to speak. Because think about it, if you were an individual like me who was like theoretically, typically developing, even though I am a little neurospicy myself, but for the first year of my life, I just laid around and listened to my parents talk and my brothers talk, and they talked in front of me and to me and at the grocery store around me when we were shopping and in the van when we were going somewhere. And then like a year later, I just laid there and listened, and then a year later I probably said like, Mama, and everybody ran over and they're like, oh, you're the smartest baby in the whole world, you just said Mama, right? Well, think about that. I laid there for a year doing nothing, just observing, and then gave it one try and we're like, the best baby ever. But with AAC, sometime what we want to avoid is, okay, well, we made this whole system, we tried it for 3.5 weeks and it didn't work, we just gave up, right? You know what I mean? You see the difference there? We need to be patient. Slow progress is still progress. And we want to customize it, and we're never going to write it off too soon, because look at all of the grace that was given to all of us before we ever said our first word. Also, there's a pair of glasses here, because getting an AAC system is not like getting a pair of glasses. You know how you get your eyes examined, get your new prescription, you put them on, and you're like, wow, there's leaves on trees again, right? So cool. AAC system is not like that. You don't give it to the person and all of a sudden they can communicate. It's kind of more like teaching somebody the content of a textbook. We're going to start in chapter 1, and we're going to go through the first 4 pages, and you're going to learn that. And once we have that, we're going to progress a little more, and we're going to progress and progress and progress. So the answer is not in the system itself. The answer is in the system plus the intervention, the implementation to get the success. So not like glasses. Okay, so there's many different prompting strategies that you can use I guess I will talk about them right now. So let's say that we're going to teach somebody how to either produce gestural mode communication or graphic mode communication. And the scenario I just told about how I laid there for a year and like maybe babbled and gooed and cooed and then finally said my first word at a year, which is when most of us say our first meaningful word. The kind of training I got was called modeling, because everybody was modeling my communication system that I was trying to learn, which was speech. And they were modeling it, they were talking, they were using speech in front of me about topics that were culturally appropriate to me, that were part of my family, that, for a whole year I had all of these models for 10 hours a day when I was awake, 365 days out of the year, modeling. And modeling is a very important instructional strategy when teaching someone to use gestural mode or graphic mode for AAC. And for modeling, typically what you would do is you would point to their system that they're using and often combine it with speech, so that if you have a learner that is trying to learn the system, then they have their system, but you also might have a copy of it. It could be non-electronic. And when you're talking to them or about them or in front of them or whatever, you are also using their system to communicate, often combining it with your own natural speech. That's why the Prinky Ramic booth out there, they also have these huge posters. So sometimes it's really nice to, like, in the entryway or in the classroom or wherever you do a playroom, to have the communication board up here in a big poster, because then you could be like, oh, I like that. Yeah, I don't know my way around here. I want it, so you're modeling the use of it. This kind of modeling of AAC is very analogous to of the modeling that we got when we acquired speech, right? We learned to speak because we watched people speak. So this is one important instructional strategy for graphic mode, modeling. The catch with it is, usually, modeling is only a good instructional strategy if the learner has good imitation skills. So this is why it has to be customized to the learner. Models don't work for everybody. You need to be able to imitate. And also, I would just say, even though I can imitate and I do learn through modeling, there were some things I couldn't learn through modeling. There were times when I needed hand over hand. I remember zipping my darn winter coat. I live in northern Minnesota, just south of the Canadian border. Zipping your big puffy winter coat is a big thing. And I remember for like 2 years, my mom or my dad coming around me from back and being like, put your hand here, hold this tab, stick this in, pull it up, right? I needed some hand over hand. Modeling just didn't do it there. My aunt taught me how to drive a stick shift. I needed hand over hand with that too. Like her leg was across the car and she's, So there are certain things where modeling doesn't maybe work for all of us, but it's an important instructional strategy. Does it make sense how you would model? Okay, you might also use a response prompt. So this is where you actually are doing some hand over hand. So you're helping the learner, make a selection, guide them to it. I'm gonna give you a scenario on this in a moment. My biggest recommendation here is that we need to fade these prompts so we don't create prompt dependence. And we want them to be independent communicators. And there are important things to consider, like you might want to use a most to least prompt, where you do whatever prompting you need to do to get the selection they want accurately, and then start to reduce it over time. Or you might want to do a least to most prompt, where you're giving just the least amount of support to get them accurate. Then there's a stimulus prompt. So a stimulus prompt is a good choice if we're working with a learner who maybe really doesn't like an instructional strategy that involves them being touched. But with a stimulus prompt, what we're gonna do is we're gonna make the correct item easier for them to find. So let's say it's snack time. We know they want the broccoli because that's our target, and maybe they have some kind of an objective related to that. So we're gonna make that broccoli symbol way bigger than all of the other ones. So it's gonna be easier for them to get it, right? And then we're gradually gonna shrink it down to be the same size as everything else. So that's another way of prompting to, get that behavior, that accurate selection going and help them learn the graphic system, but you don't have to do a hand over hand. Other things you can do is let's say you're using individual picture symbols. You know the one that they want. You might even have that a little bit closer to them so they're more likely to pick the bubbles they want. And you're like, yeah, you got the bubbles, let's play bubbles, cool, good job, So there are strategies that you can use to teach them how to use graphic or gestural communication AAC systems. But often learners benefit from a combination of different instructional strategies. And part of customizing the AAC system is, like we talked about before, just making sure that the symbols are ones that this learner can use. They're the right size, they're the right color, they can see them, all of that. But also that they can learn how to use that system. And that's where these various instructional strategies will come into play. So much to talk about with instructional strategies. If you are interested in it, I have no financial interest in this book, but I do know the author very well. But I think it's chapter 5 in here that's kind of like a little bit of a cookbook on, okay, you tried this in AAC in graphic mode and it didn't quite work. What should you try next? Okay, how could you do, what kind of alterations are you gonna make? So if you want to take a picture of that later, feel free, or just email me, jhm@d.umn.edu. I'll send you a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, so we were talking about getting the system right for them and then having instructional strategies that will work for the learner. But what happens if you just don't even really know where to start at all? If you're, really wondering like, where should I start? Should I start by teaching the iPad with the voice output? Or should I start with a communication picture symbol book? Or should I be teaching gestures? Or what kind of symbols should I have? Should I have text or text with picture or what? So we have these questions where the extant evidence doesn't give us clear answers yet. Well, here's the cool thing. The learner, the individual, him or herself, can really help us out a lot here. So back in, again, I think we started this like in 2011 or 12 something. This is actually published in Language, Speech, and Hearing Services in the schools, Hyppa-Martin and some of my colleagues. We encountered this absolutely fantastically most beautiful little baby you've ever seen. He was a toddler, he had Angelman syndrome. I didn't know anything about Angelman syndrome at the time, but he was starting to engage in some, challenging behaviors and missing communication milestones. If I remember right, he was about 18 months of age when we began working with him. And at that time, the research literature really didn't give any clear suggestions about what is typically maybe going to be best for this learner. Should we invest our precious therapy time in teaching gestural communication or graphic mode communication, or should we be working on speech? And we didn't know, and there wasn't a lot of scientific evidence to guide us. So here's what we did, because again, if you need to tweak things, you can do that in AAC. Okay, so our question was, what mode is going to be best for this child? Graphic, gestural, or vocal? So we talked to the parents, and the parents told us like 10 things that this child really, really, really loved. And then one of my fellow grad PhD students and I sat on the floor, and we had him with us, and we systematically put out those two things, like, okay, mom and dad said you love the phone and the empty bottle, which one is it? And we would see which one he would like gravitate towards, and he did this, we'd give 1 point to the empty bottle. And we went through all of these paired up combinations of the 10 different items, and we had 3 clear winners. So he communicated to us, right? He communicated to us through gestural mode that he loved bubbles. He loved this sugar-free drink that was parent approved, that they said he could have as a treat, and he loved, balloons. So in the party aisle at Target, there's that balloon blower upper that you have to go like that, and it's like, voop, 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 and then you let it go, and it's like, woo, all over the place. Okay, those were the 3 very clear winners, loved them all. So we randomly kind of assigned them to each to a mode. We put balloon in graphic mode. So I had a board like this, it had 3 big symbols on it, and one of them was that picture of that balloon, really big symbol. Then in gestural mode, we put the drink there, because we thought, like, if I do this, you know what that means, right? It's pretty easy to understand and should be pretty easy to make. And he couldn't really cup his hand because he was just a little toddler, but he could go like this. And we thought, for starting, we're going to start there, and eventually we'll get here. So that was gesture. We put drink and gesture. And then for vocalization, we put bubbles, because we thought, the ba sound is pretty early developing sound, so even if he could just say like ba 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 ba, then we'd be like, bubbles, you said bubbles, let's blow the bubbles. So then what we did is we went session by session with him, and in each session, we did I want to say maybe about 10 learning opportunities in each mode. So I would take out the bubbles and have him right here, and I'd be like, ba, 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 ba. And if the minute he made any vocalization, I'd be like, you said bubbles. When we'd blow and we'd play, and all right, then we'd put the bubbles back down, and then I'd be like waiting with anticipation for any vocal sound to come out. And the minute it did, I'd be like, bubbles, yeah, let's play bubbles. Okay, then in gestural mode, so the bubbles are gone. I have that drink, he takes a little sip of it. He's like, oh, this is the best stuff that mom gives me on special occasions. I have it right here. And, I'm like waiting for the gesture. And the minute he would take that hand and start to move it, I'd be like, drink, you said drink. Yeah, have a sip. Oh, that's so good, Then for, what do we have left? Balloons, yeah, for graphic. So I would put out the graphic symbol set. And, I would practice hand over hand at first. So I hand over hand, he touches that with my support. And I'm like, you said balloon, and we play the balloon. And then I try to reduce that cue, so now I'm just bringing his hand like an inch from it, and he just has to get the last inch on his own, and reducing and reducing and reducing the cue. So every session, we did maybe like 10 opportunities per mode. We were flexible because, you know, he's a little guy. Sometimes he was really into it, and maybe we would do more, and sometimes a little less. But we would then record what percentage of in each of these modes he was accurately making that request. So some people might say, but you know, communication isn't just about requesting. I agree, but we have to start somewhere, right? And we're gonna get to commenting, directing others, sharing information, entertaining, but we're just starting somewhere. And I always want to start with something that they love, because when we're introducing AAC, I want it to be the dispenser of all wonderful things in the whole world, right? So when these systems come out, it's like, oh, we're going to do something awesome. And they don't really, I mean, really they're learning and you're teaching them, but you know, they think it's just so much fun. Okay, so then we took data for each session, and every session we would switch which mode we would start with, because we didn't want them priming one another, you know? And then we just took this performance data. And when you look at this performance data, okay, this is vocal. Vocal mode did not get goose eggs. And you know what, with vocal mode, you can't do hand over hand, you know? You can't go in there and vibrate the vocal folds and be like, here's how you do it. It totally doesn't work. So it's, if they don't have really great imitation skills for that, then that's a tough one to get going. So he was telling us, look, vocal mode's really hard for me. And then gestural, I mean, there was a session where, and by the way, this is not the real data, but you can look at it here. This is a simpler version to project on PowerPoint. So gestural was something like this, where, you know, up to about 30% accurate, which was great. But graphic mode was getting up over 90% accurate. So what is that telling us? We went in here and said, I do not know what mode is going to be best for this kid, but I need to figure out how are we going to allocate our therapy time as effectively as possible to get the biggest bang for the buck and get this child communicating with something. And so we let him tell us. Then, when we see results like this, do we say, okay, we're never going to do gestural or vocal? Of course not, right? But we might maybe allocate the majority of our therapy time for a while to graphic to try to get a system going. But we're going to continue working on vocal mode and gestural mode too, because we all use them. And you know, just what we're seeing in the first 7 sessions doesn't say what the rest of the life is going to be like, right? But this is, do you see how this is a very valuable way to answer these questions when we don't know what's best for individuals, maybe for a certain individual with MWS, but we can answer a lot of questions this way. Yeah.
Can you repeat, explain what the y-axis is, the numbers, what they is?
Percent correct.
Percent correct.
Yeah, I should have that. So 0% correct to 100% correct.
Okay, so what it means is that at the end, 90% of the time he was pointing at the right thing you wanted.
Yep, it means in session 7, which was probably about a 30-minute session, he was like 95% accurate in telling us he wanted the balloon by hitting the symbol. A little more, if you look at the actual article, the data goes on and on and on, because what actually happened is when I first started out with him, when we first started out, it's very much a team effort, we had like 3 picture symbols like that. And it was like balloon, something else, and something else. And initially, our data was kind of flat. He made some progress, but then wasn't, you know, seeing the improvement we wanted to see. So we got rid of one of the symbols, so now it's only a field of 2. And then he was making a little more progress, but that was still too hard. So then we just got rid of the other symbol, and we only had that balloon symbol on here. And we did maybe like 3 sessions with just the balloon symbol until he was like 100%. He was like, I totally get now what, you know, how I use this thing. And then we added back in just a blank symbol. And he still was discriminating. And then you could add more in, and we eventually got it up to 3 symbols again. But that just shows you how, you know, when I say, I don't want to sound negative, but I occasionally hear people say, well, we tried AAC and it didn't work. Well, it will work. It's Really important to customize it, not just the system through feature matching, but also your intervention approach for that child, right? And there are ways you can do that. And I know we only have, a few more minutes left, but email me and I will send you the bonus track of a bunch of resources. And if you're really interested in stuff like this is a great textbook. You can take a photo of it or email me and I'll send you. It's kind of like a cookbook style textbook in intervention approaches. But believe me, we could spend a whole semester on intervention and instructional strategies for sure. But does that kind of make sense how you would? Yeah, question back there, ma'am? I can send you this article that talks about this process and a list of some other resources if you would like, if you're interested in learning more. I'll send you the PowerPoint too. Oh, I did. It's JHM it's on the first slide. And using graphic mode, it's jhm@d.umn.edu. Please email me. D. Okay, just UMN works too. Sorry. Either one's fine. At UMN, as in University of Minnesota.edu. JHM, as in Jolene Hyppa-Martin. UMN, yeah. Please email me. I have a great interest in Mowat-Wilson syndrome now and look forward to connecting more with the community. Yeah, question.
Okay, I have a 1-year-old. So I'm thinking, he's with grandma 2 days a week, he's in a daycare 2 days a week, he's with me the rest of the time. If I were to print out pictures of or certain things and make him his own mini
Yeah.
hands-on board, should it be the same at home as it is at school, or should I do,
Yep. How old of a child again?
just a year?
Just a year old. So the question was, should all of the boards be the same or can they be different? The answer is it really can be both, because let's say that this is the changing table at home. Right here, you could have vocabulary about, there's your foot, and oh, it's stinky, and now I'm using these symbols and modeling while I'm doing all of this stuff at the changing table. And hey, maybe one day that baby will accidentally hit toe, and you'd be like, you said toe, let me smell that stinky toe. You know what I mean? And obviously, maybe that's not vocabulary that would go to school. If there are other, maybe bath time vocabulary, so some of it is posted around the house at activities where it naturally, you're communicating anyway, and then maybe at grandma's house or daycare, there's a few other things like that. And then maybe there's also general communication boards that are common activities that occur at both of them, as a starting point.
So for that age, I'm 9 months old. What are your thoughts on what's beneficial? What's starting inside? I went to sign language first. But is this AAC graphic an easier thing for them to pick up?
Good question. Maybe yes and maybe no. So the question was very young child, 9 months old, should she try graphic or gestural? Maybe both. It's really dependent on the child. If you email me, I'll send you a couple other resources for you to kind of think about. But here's another thought. So starting with gesture is a great idea too. Sometimes, how we were talking about symbols and I need to be able to produce it, you have to understand it or we don't have communication. So I once worked with a child who would do like this, and I didn't know what that meant. I thought is there a mosquito in your hair or something bothering you, or you lose your breath or whatever. And then the paraprofessional said, oh no, don't you know when she goes like that, it means she wants to lie down on the windowsill for a while and take a little break. Okay, that was not a gestural symbol that communicated to me that I would need to lie down and take a little break, right? So there are things called gesture dictionaries. I'm a huge fan of them. Again, you can start AAC by going to the dollar store or just using stuff you have around. Get a clear plastic thing like this, a piece of paper, make 3 little categories on it, and say, okay, when Sandra taps the right side of her head, that means she wants to lie down on the windowsill and take a nap. So what you do is say, I saw you tap your head, you're tired, let's go lay down for a while. because now we're teaching the adults what that symbol is, because that's kind of a symbol that not a lot of people know. You know, sometimes I hear that little ones will like tap their hip if they want a diaper change. Well, if a care partner doesn't understand that, that can lead to discomfort and whatever. So, and then just leave this lying around or put it on your fridge so that when people come to your home and, you know, they see a gesture like that, that maybe isn't as iconic as drink, we're starting to get that into the communication system. We'll shape it into something more conventional later, but if this child is trying to communicate to us, we're going to respond to it. We want them engaged, socially engaged. Another example I had is one individual I worked with who was in a full wheelchair, and her main movement was eye movement. One time in a session, she kicked her leg, and that was kind of a big deal, and it turned out that she kicks her legs when she's kind of really angry about something, and we've been talking about the Packers versus the Vikings, and she hates the Packers, and I didn't know what the leg kick was. I'm like, is she in pain? And so now gesture dictionary, and it's on the wheelchair and so on. And some people will make their gesture dictionaries like, you know, this with little booklets. You can do that too. I'm a fan of like putting them out and leaving them where people will see them. Some clients who use chairs, they're like right on their wheelchair tray, or I let them pick the colors. We'll make a fun craft activity out of it. For one client, he worked in a group home, and there was a lot of turnover in the group home. And so we made a big poster like this on the wall, and we took photos of him with the gestures in each square, you know, what they meant to him. And then we wrote the meaning, what the gesture was, what the meaning was, and what the group home worker, how they should respond. So we need to start getting those symbols into communication, because again, if they only mean something to one person, we don't have communication, and that's always our goal. So even all of that is AAC, you know, gestures. We can start capitalizing on those as well, too. So what are some things to do next? So if you are interested in, you know, maybe you know somebody who needs an AAC assessment, at least in the US, you can go to asha.org, ASHA.org, and click on Find a Professional, and then type in a zip code. Speech and language pathologists are the professionals who are trained to do AAC assessments, but we love partnering with other people. Thank you so much. I partner with ABA experts all the time. I really enjoy working with them, occupational therapy, physical therapy, educators. But if you're looking for an SLP who can really help you with AAC interventions, check out asha.org. What else you can do is please don't ever say, look, you know, we tried it and it didn't work, because it really just doesn't not work, you know? We just have to make it the best thing in the whole world. One other quick story. So I was working with this young man, changing a lot of details for privacy, obviously. But as an infant, he had a traumatic brain injury, had cortical visual impairment. We'd been trying an eye gaze device with him, and he was showing some really good progress with it. And so we went to the school with the eye gaze device. We're talking to the whole IEP team, and you know, he showed them how he used it a little bit, and it was kind of fun. And then one of the teachers, who was very well-meaning, said, okay, well, when you get this eye gaze device, Bob, then we can start putting your social studies test on it. So remember the idea, like, okay, if you get this new system and you have to take your social studies test on it, like that's what it's being used for, are you gonna want to use that? Yeah, and then it's gonna be like, oh, we tried it and it didn't work. No, it could have. It's that you have to make it the dispenser of all wonderful things in the world, at least in the beginning, right? And then you can start using it for everything else. But yeah, so even things like that can derail an AAC intervention. So don't let that happen to you. Just remember, one size does not fit all. After you customize the AAC system to their skills and their needs, and you're monitoring that learner performance and making adjustments to it, if you're not getting the improvements you see, you're gonna make it a little easier, give a little more support, right? Because they're teaching us how they learn. You know, make sure you're monitoring that performance and adapting accordingly. But model and make it fun. So modeling is a strategy where, again, you're pointing to whatever system, or you're using the gestures and combining it with speech and letting them learn from your examples. So model their system. Let their siblings model it. For some children I've worked with, we would just take her communication device, the young gal's communication device. She had cerebral palsy. I just put it face down on the color copier at work, made photocopies of every page, went to the dollar store, got a bunch of plastic things and a 3-ring binder. We stuck it in. We had it on the coffee table, on the dining room table, in the playroom. And her 2 older brothers would actually go to her device, that's, a copy of the device, and be like, "You are bad. I want," So, but that's modeling, right? That's still modeling. So get creative with that. Make it fun. Our goal is robust communication. In the end, our goal is we want everybody to be able to say whatever it is they want to communicate right when they want to communicate it. But we have to start somewhere. And we don't have to wait until we have all the fancy bells and whistles and the latest apps and so on to start. We can start small. We can start with a gesture dictionary. We can start with some symbols, around the house. You can print some pictures off from the internet. You can just start, right? We have to start somewhere. And there's a lot of other resources, like here in Minnesota, we have the Minnesota Speech Language Hearing Association AAC repository, which is a website of really carefully curated AAC intervention tools that I put together with some of my wonderful colleagues from the Minnesota Speech Language Hearing Association. And if you, again, drop me an email, I'd be happy to send that to you. There's a whole parent section there. And we try to keep the repository so that it's curated. We don't want like every single thing there. We just want, these are the things that have been the most helpful to the parents and families that we have worked with. So those are a few things that you can do next. Another thing is Qwynn Tyman and I are conducting a research survey study that I know was posted on the foundation's social media recently, a link to it. So if you're interested, it's a very short survey. Our hope is that we can gather information from families of individuals who are really familiar with individuals with MWS. So we can put together an article that says, hey, look, if you are an SLP or a special educator or OTPT, and you're getting your first client who has Mowat-Wilson syndrome, here are the things that a therapist might want to know right off of the bat based on what we know right now. So that's our goal with that. I know Deborah has put it up on MWS's social media, so please check that out if you're willing to. And I am so happy to answer any questions that you might have.
It was really interesting. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Really passionate about that.
I am. Thank you. Yes, I'm definitely passionate about this, that's for sure. Communication it's so important. It's a human right. Yeah.
What do you say to your insurance company who says that you can't have speech therapy for a child who has no vocalization?
Boy. Yeah. You know what I would say? I honestly don't know, because that is definitely not my area of expertise. I can tell you that I've gotten AAC systems funded by insurance companies. I've never had one be turned down for funding. But yesterday, did you see the session about navigating support systems like that? It was by the gentleman in this room right over here, and I caught a portion of it, and he actually addressed that. So I would recommend reaching out to him. Did anybody go to that session? He was talking about like SSI and insurance and yeah, was okay, yeah, yeah. So I would talk to that person because it sounds like they have a lot of expertise. I mean, from my perspective, things I've written in the past are if a person can't vocalize and call out for help, or if they can't vocalize, how are they going to call out for help from another room? Or, how are they ever going to participate in their healthcare decisions? Or if they're not directly in somebody's line of sight, how will you know that they need help? Or, medical necessity kind of things. But again, I'm really great at AAC, not great at insurance, I'm sorry.
I didn't really expect an answer, but I thought I'd just throw that out there first.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Please feel free to email me. I know I mentioned this, but my students in my lab and I have really taken an interest in Mowat-Wilson syndrome now and really want to continue, pursuing this and being active with the organization. So I'd love to hear your stories or hear from you. Feel free to drop me an email. Thank you, everybody.